Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Frank, and thanks to the Center for Security Policy for hosting this event. Thanks to all of you for coming out. And obviously, we're all looking forward to the debate tomorrow evening, and I think this is a great way to kick it off. And you're going to hear, and already have heard, from some outstanding analysts of our national security posture. There's no doubt that the United States has suffered badly under the Obama presidency. His own officials have testified in Congress within the past 30 days that we are more at risk of international terrorism than at any point since 9/11. And the threat's not just an international terrorist threat, it's a threat from adversaries around the world like Russia making inroads militarily in Europe, like China making the South China Sea a province of that country. And there's no graver damage that the President has caused than to our military capabilities. The fact is, Barack Obama does not view American national security as one of his priorities. It gets in the way with what his real priority is, and he told us very candidly in the 2008 election it was to fundamentally transform the country. And national security just distracts from that. I think that it's critical that we make national security the central argument in the 2016 election. I think our fellow citizens need to understand that while there are a lot of other important issues out there, there isn't anything more important than protecting the country. Now, you know, the political operatives, the political commentators like to say that the average voter doesn't care about national security, it doesn't affect their daily lives, they don't vote on the basis of national security. I think the people are much smarter than the political class in Washington. I think they understand that when ISIS beheads Americans and others in what used to be Syria and Iraq, that that's a direct threat to us. And when we see the tragedy come here, when we see terrorists shed American blood on American soil, as they just did in San Bernardino, they understand that national security is the central issue. The first job of the President is to keep the country safe. So as we look at all of the candidates who will be here tomorrow and others in the Democratic Party, I just think it's critical that before you make up your minds who you're going to support, you should ask yourselves, and all of our fellow citizens should ask themselves, are they capable of sitting behind the big desk in the Oval Office and keeping the country safe? And if they don't pass that test, then you don't get to any of the other issues. If you think they do pass that test, then by all means, look at what the other issues are. And I've tried to argue that the candidates have to do more than simply give an eloquent speech about national security that their staffers have written. They've got to do more than show they can memorize prepackaged talking points. I want to hear how they think about foreign policy. Because the fact is, beginning in 2017, when they're inaugurated, looking forward 4 or 8 years into the future, they're going to face issues and challenges and crises that we cannot possibly predict today. So how they talk about the current issues is important, but it's more important that you have the confidence that they've got the judgment and the leadership to confront our enemies around the world in ways that we don't know at the present moment. And I think you can see the risks that we've undertaken over the last 7 and soon to be 8 years by electing somebody who's utterly unqualified to think through foreign policy issues, who simply doesn't care about them. The net effect of Barack Obama's presidency will show that the biggest threat to national security that we have is sitting in the Oval Office. Because he's indifferent to national security. He just gave a speech, gave a talk at the Pentagon while you were in here after hearing another 2-hour briefing by his military advisors on what to do about the Islamic State. And the remarks that he gave, he could have given 2 weeks ago. In fact, he did give them 2 weeks ago. He could have given them a month ago. He did give them a month ago. He's not going to do anything different. And our adversaries around the world have fully sized up this president, which is why I think we have to expect that the pace and the scope of challenges we're going to see will actually accelerate in the course of the next year. And I'll tell you something, they've also sized up the likely successor in his party, who is the ideological twin of Barack Obama. You know, a lot of people say that Hillary Clinton is tougher on national security than Barack Obama is. And I'm not going to say anything partisan here. I'm just going to review objective reality. Here's the objective reality. Hillary and her husband were a year ahead of me in law school. It was a small place. I knew them, as I knew almost everybody else there. She was a radical then. She's a radical today. You know, the way you are that time of life is pretty much the way you are. I like to say I've been burdened with the Clintons 20 years longer than the rest of the country. I have a civic obligation to make sure she doesn't get elected because her policies will not be any different from Barack Obama's. And you can see this play out in a host of areas. But I want to focus on the military here and what we need beginning on Inauguration Day in 2017. We have suffered under this administration in countless ways. One of the most important is that Secretary of Defense Gates, when he stayed over after the Bush administration into the Obama administration, tried to refocus defense priorities away from more or less traditional conflicts to focus on counterinsurgency as we undertook in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think a lot in Secretary Gates' attitude in the Obama administration explains what was wrong at the end of the Bush administration. Because the fact is that we are in a time of multiple threats around the world. Yes, the threat of terrorism, as we've seen in Afghanistan and Iraq, as we see in the case of ISIS, is very real, and we're not addressing it. But that's not all that we're going to face. To say that we don't need land warfare capabilities as we had during the Cold War, because after all, we're not going to see that kind of conflict in Europe ever again. Hello, have you been to Moscow recently? Have you seen what Vladimir Putin has done to the Crimea and the threats he poses elsewhere in the territory of the former Soviet Union and East and Central Europe? Have you seen China's growing naval, air, and land capabilities? The fact is, the future is uncertain, and the spectrum of threats that we will face goes from the most localized kinds of conflict right up to the risk, again, of an exchange of nuclear salvos. So the challenge for the next president is to keep America strong at all potential levels of conflict. We used to call this, just 10 years ago, we used to call this conflict full spectrum dominance, meaning that we and our allies were capable of defeating threats from whatever source they emanated. That's not something you hear anymore, and it's going to be a challenge for the next president because this is going to be very costly. It wasn't just the sequestration process that decimated the military budget. Barack Obama, across his tenure, has cut from projected levels in 2008 roughly $1.5 trillion. And that's ex the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the next president has a huge rebuilding job to do, comparable to what Ronald Reagan faced. And he's got to do it not just in one area or another, he's got to do it across the full range of American military capabilities. Now, I understand and I fully support the concern that we reduce our national deficit, we reduce total federal expenditures, we get the national debt down, but that doesn't mean that you treat military and intelligence-related expenditures like you treat domestic spending. Under Obama, the budget of every domestic agency has gone through the ceiling, and the budget of the Pentagon has gone into the basement. It's not the case when we come to reducing the federal deficit that every budget dollar is equal. A dollar spent on soybean subsidies is not the same as a dollar spent on a carrier battle group. That's the reality. So what does that mean? It means you're going to have to increase military spending dramatically over a sustained period of time, and you're going to have to find comparable reductions in domestic spending. That suits me just fine. But we need candidates who are prepared to say that, because you can't get an electoral mandate by hiding what your budget plans are going to be. And I think going forward, that's going to be absolutely critical. Critical for the war on terrorism, critical to prevent Russia from gaining more ground, literally, in Central and Eastern Europe, critical to stopping China from building islands in the South China Sea and making that a Chinese province, removing those waters from their international status now and getting their hands around the throats of the economies of Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, because every barrel of oil that goes to those countries comes from the Middle East and goes through the South China Sea. So there's a huge range of capabilities that the next president has to get, or we will find ourselves weaker around the world. And in particular, when it comes to the war against terrorism, there are a series of things we need to do here, but more importantly, we need a serious effort to destroy ISIS in the Middle East. It's not enough to talk about it if we don't do it. Every day that goes by, they consolidate their control over what is a new state in the Middle East, and they become a safe haven for terrorists, as we've seen in Paris and in San Bernardino. But let's not also forget the huge threat posed by the government in Tehran and its continued progress towards nuclear weapons. We've signed in the Vienna Agreement over Iran's nuclear weapons program probably the single worst diplomatic defeat in the history of the United States. The Iranians will take advantage of it. The North Koreans will take advantage of it. Others will take advantage of it. You're going to see more nuclear proliferation as a consequence. And this is a direct danger not only to our friends in the Middle East, but to us as well. Because the ultimate dream of the terrorists, it's been true for decades, is they want access to nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. And if they get it, the next 9/11 in this country will be far more deadly than the first 9/11. So I know this has now filled the room with sweetness and light, but that's the point. If the president doesn't talk about these issues, if the opposition party doesn't talk about these issues, then the people don't talk about these issues. And we are in a period now where the politicians have to listen to the citizens. We don't get that opportunity very often, but in the midst of a presidential election, this is the time to make our voices heard. Ultimately, we do get the kind of government we deserve. And if we stand up and say we will not countenance electing anyone who doesn't put American national security first, we will prevail. Thank you very much.